With Western nations pledging billions of dollars to help Ukraine fight Russia and rebuild itself, non-European nations such as Africa, which also rely on aid from the West, feel neglected. African countries, formerly colonized by the West, are sensing a retreat in pledges to help aid their development and fight against climate change, a phenomenon towards which developing regions such as Africa have least contributed but are being disproportionately affected by it. According to the Paris-based Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, assistance for Ukraine in 2022 rose to $16 billion compared to less than $1 billion a year earlier. Aid for Africa, however, fell by 8% to $29 billion in the same period, despite the fact that it has been one of the world's worst affected regions by the war, given its dependence on food imports from the two warring nations, Russia and Ukraine, which are the breadbaskets of the world. While Africa is not against aid for Ukraine, it has expressed fears of a double standard on international aid during a joint meeting in April with the International Monetary Fund and World Bank in Washington, as per an AFP report. A diplomat in Benin told AFP that the war in Ukraine lays bare the real face of the great powers in their action with regard to Africa, and added that the continent was being abandoned. African nations have acknowledged that the collapse of the economy of Ukraine, which contracted by almost a third last year, would send shockwaves across Europe and beyond. However, the massive scale of Western aid to Kyiv is unlike anything seen in Europe in recent decades, and is raising concerns in the African continent. On February 24, 2022, Ukraine's allies pledged over $150 billion according to the German-based Kiel Institute for the World Economy. The United States alone has approved 4 rounds of aid to Ukraine till now, in response to Russia's invasion, totaling about $113 billion and will most likely add another $6.2 billion to the aid. On June 20, 2023, the European Union's Executive Commission proposed an additional $50 billion in assistance for Kyiv. The Group of 7 or G7 nations and its partners including Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom and the US have made a $115 billion commitment for Ukraine. Niger's Foreign Minister Hassoumi Massoudou told AFP that the enormous amounts of money which are being given in aid to Ukraine were at one time considered an impossibility. Now, however, it looks possible, and said that this demonstrated that resources and mechanisms exist that could also be used to channel money to Africa. A Zambian government official who preferred not to be named told AFP that the war in Ukraine underscored the need for Africa to become more self-sufficient and less reliant on Western support. The official pointed out that there are conflicts going on in northern Congo, Sudan, and other parts of Africa, but the support Ukraine is getting from Western countries is unprecedented. This feeling of being neglected by the West has prompted the African Union to start looking after their own interests and pursue policies independent of the West. Africa has been pushing for a peaceful end to the war between Russia and Ukraine and has pursued both countries to consider negotiations. It hasn't sanctioned or isolated Russia as dictated by the West, and this could result in further cuts in Western aid to the region. Finland, a Nordic country in northern Europe which is part of the US-led NATO, recently announced that it will not give any development aid to governments and countries in Africa it believes support Russia's war in Ukraine. This alleged Western bias in the context of Ukraine was also observed when thousands of Ukrainian civilians were fleeing the war and seeking shelter in neighboring and other countries. They were not subjected to the same strict asylum rules and regulations as those from non-European nations such as Haiti, Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Mexico, and so on, who are fleeing dire circumstances in their own countries.